The three-dimensional conceptual world of our fathers had no sensorium for the phenomenon of time. Living in a spatially frozen world, they considered the temporal world to be a disturbing factor which was repressed, either by being ignored or by being falsified by measurement into a spatial component. That is to say, in the perspectival world conception, everything was measured in spatial terms, including the phenomenon of time and other phenomena devoid of spatial, though not spatializing, properties, which were reshaped by measure into spatial components. For perspective-thinking man, time lacked all quality. This is the decisive factor. He employed time only in a materialized and quantitative sense. He lived by Galileo's maxim, to measure everything measurable, and to make everything measurable that is not yet measurable. This maxim, an Aristotelian axiom driven to extremes, formed the leading motif of this perspectival age. But to measure is to spatialize, and rampant measurement leads to quantification. One of the best authorities on the theories and philosophies of this perspectival age, Werner Gent, stated that the age had declassed and degraded time to a mere numerical quantity. Stated in more precise terms, the era had perverted time by making it into an analytical, measurable relationship and by materializing it. Because of the materialization, the relationship gave rise in the course of the last few centuries to an extreme dualistic form of thinking, which recognized only two antithetical and irreconcilable constituents of the world: measurable, demonstrable things, the rational components of science which were valid, and the non-measurable phenomena, the irrational non-components which were invalid. To the perspectival age, time meant nothing but a system of measurements or relationships between two moments. Time as a quality or an intensity was simply not taken into account and was deemed to be only an accidental and inessential phenomenon. Time, however, is a much more complex phenomenon than mere instrumentality or the accidents of chronological time. The fact that we today still think in terms of the spatial, fixed, three-dimensional world of conceptuality is an obstacle to our realization of the more complex significance of the phenomenon. Anyone who dares to venture such a realization is accused of terminological obfuscation, but this should not prevent us from stating that time, as a reality, encompasses still other essential forms of appearance, which are proper to it alone, and not to space. To the perception of the aperspectival world, time appears to be the very fundamental function, and to be of a most complex nature. It manifests itself in accordance with a given consciousness structure and the appropriate possibility of manifestation in its various aspects as clock time, natural time, cosmic or sidereal time, as biological duration, rhythm, meter, as mutation, discontinuity, relativity, as vital dynamics, psychic energy, and thus in a certain sense in the form we call soul and the unconscious, and as mental dividing. Time manifests itself as the unity of past, present, and future, as the creative principle, the power of imagination, as work, and even as motorosity. And along with the vital, psychic, biological, cosmic, rational, creative, sociological, and technical aspects of time, we must include, last but not least, physical, geometrical time, which is designated as the fourth dimension. This seemingly random enumeration of temporal aspects may be disconcerting to someone unable to disengage himself from his three-dimensional conception of the world. To a systematician, these aspects will seem to be incongruent quantities, but they are not quantities. They are elements and functionals which cannot be conceived of or arrayed in spatial terms. The apparent lack of a system that seems to prevail in our enumeration, in fact, corresponds to the respective realities. What is affected can be understood systematically, but the power to affect cannot, unless we wish to perpetuate the mistakes of perspectival man by erroneously converting intensities into spatial extensities. We should also avoid the error of placing the affected into a causal relationship with the affecting, and we should avoid the additional error of considering them in a dualistic fashion as antitheses, since this would amount to yet a further systematization. Nor can a purely categorical mode of consideration do justice to the temporal aspects enumerated. We are not dealing with incongruent phenomena, but with varied aspects and manifestational modalities of a basic phenomenon devoid of any spatial character. In other words, a predominantly categorical evaluation is not appropriate here. Every categorical system is an idealized ordering schema by which actual phenomena are fixed and absolutized. As such, it is a three-dimensional framework with a static and spatial character. Such categorical systems are able to deal with the world only within a three-dimensional and conceptual worldview. We shall have to become accustomed to recognizing acategorical elements and the preeminent acategorical magnitude, that is, time, as an intensity. Its binding and integrating function is expressed in its acategorical efficacy. Our previous and strictly categorical mode of thinking must be complemented by and integrated with the addition of the acategorical mode of realization. We will have no success with mastering the tasks given to our epoch unless we have the courage to supersede the merely three-dimensional, spatially conceived systems. This is not to say that we must reject them, only that they may be reduced to their proper magnitudes and extensities. Intensities, hitherto spatialized and fixed, demand their own mode of arrangement, systasis. Wherever we are able to perceive acategorical effectualities as such, and not as categorical fixities, the world will become transparent. We are then no longer tied to the spatial structure of systems, but will be able to see through them systatically, i.e. integratedly. The transparently or diaphaneously emerging space will then no longer be a three-dimensional, but an already four-dimensional reality. With the terms four-dimensional, and particularly fourth dimension, the form in which time is manifest in a physical sense, we have touched upon a key in a certain sense that can be of aid in clarifying our predicament. The fact that the vast complex time, encompassing and co-constituting the world, has been ignored for centuries, even excluded from knowledge, or at best, falsely spatialized, has left us unprepared to cope with the extraordinary implications of the phenomenon of time, just when modern knowledge thrust it on our attention. As long as the epoch paid tribute to the three-dimensional world conception, time remained a suppressed force, and as such appeared with a vengeance when it was finally freed, or freed itself. Like any suppressed or repressed force, when first released it overpowers, frightens, and confuses us in a destructive manner and seems to hold the upper hand. Because we were accustomed for generations to the old conception, we thought ourselves able to dominate it with our spatializing falsification. Imprisoned in our three-dimensional conceptual world, we believed time to be no more than an easily subdued and harmless accessory, which could be employed with impunity merely as clock time. Since it turns out that time is much more, indeed, is a world constituent, the degree of repercussions in the wake of this knowledge has been in proportion to the discrepancy between our previous estimation of time and its actual and enduring efficacy. But this discrepancy is so pronounced that we can only gradually realize that time means more than clock time.